Okay, welcome everyone to our seminar today. We're actually going to do a weed walk outside. My name is Bill Lubick, of course you guys know me. But I have two distinguished colleagues here that are going to be leading our walk today. And really they're going to focus on weed science and looking at all different aspects of weeds, from the life cycle of weeds and how can we get one step ahead of them. In most farms, one of our biggest problems that we have on any farm, be it organic, conventional, whatever, is trying to control pest problems. And one of our biggest pests are weeds and deer, of course, you know, are another big pest. But weeds have become a real issue because having enough labor to go out there and weed all the time, especially if you're an organic grower, it's tough to go out there and have enough in your arsenal to really be able to fight and stay ahead of them. So thank for job security for Terry here, because Terry Biesenkant is our weed specialist, and he's always going to have job security because we have nothing but weeds, and then as soon as we try to solve one weed problem, some more come in from out of the country or whatever and take over. And a lot of our area up at the Earth Center, you guys saw, we're getting a lot of mugwort, so Terry was just talking to us about how to control some of that a little bit better. But we have here Terry Biesenkant is our specialist in weed science, and he and my colleague here, Meredith Melendez from Mercer County, have been doing some projects and looking specifically at how do we approach weed control from more than just the standpoint of just going out and spraying. What other options do we have? What do we need to look at? What can we do in terms of paying attention to the life cycle, paying attention to what stage the weed is at? So, and they're going to do a lab outside and actually go over some things, but they have some really neat handouts that they're going to be giving out here, which I'm already excited getting this book. But I'm going to turn it over to these guys, and they're going to do a wonderful job. I have to say that I could not have two better colleagues at Rutgers University. They are just amazing. They're both hardworking people. They just both got tenure in the past year, right?
Yeah.
So now they're associate professors. So congratulations on that. And I'm going to turn it over to Terry and Meredith.
I'll just do an overview of
Yes.
the madness that went into this. So
Hey, how you doing?
about 5 years ago, Terry and I did a survey of mostly organic farms. Some of the farms were using organic practices, but not certified organic. What we were interested in is finding out which of the weed species did they think were their highest priority in terms of needing to control within their farm. So we looked at weeds that were in the field, weeds that were more of an issue when they were using plasticulture versus, bare row, as well as what were they having issues with in high tunnels. And so the results of that survey we used to get a specialty crop block grant, which I don't know if you guys have talked about block grants before.
Yes.
But they're through the Department of Agriculture, and our State Board of Ag, which is made up of farmers, takes a look at that and decides on whether the project is worthy enough. And thankfully they decided that this was worthy enough. And so we're nearing the end of this grant cycle, which is why we're here today, because we need to be able to get some of this information out. So as Bill showed you, you don't need to grab the book now because it's kind of big and heavy. But SARE, which just came out with this, Managing Weeds on Your Farm. And we got really lucky that they just came out with this because we were using the draft form of this, which is written by probably the most knowledgeable weed guy in the world.
The guy who wrote this book was a weed ecologist. And actually, there is not so many of them around, but he was a weed ecologist working at Cornell University, Dr. Chuck Moller. I say was because unfortunately he passed 2 years ago, but at least we inherited his knowledge that he accumulated for a number of years looking at weeds, not just as a weed scientist where we try to control weeds and sometimes use pesticides, but also with a kind of ecological perspective where you want to look at the biology of the plant, where you want to look at the condition in which it's growing, so you can take advantage of that for getting better control. So everything is in this book. Yeah, Meredith was lucky enough to get some free copy for you.
Yes, and the trouble too, prior to Chuck passing, is he was slowly going blind. So it really inhibited this project, all that information that he had written in draft form, into getting published. And the two people that did get this, are they at, it's Cornell and...
Tony Di Tommaso.
Yeah, so it really worked
who's
in our
at
favor
Cornell.
that they published this book, 'cause it's great.
John Teasdale, who is at Cornell as well. So it's Cornell book, but it's a sum of years and years of knowledge from Chuck Moller.
So, and another part of the grant was that we needed to get fact sheets published about the weed species that the farmers indicated were an issue. So we focused on yellow nutsedge, Canada thistle, smooth and red root pigweed, hairy galansoga, and large crabgrass. So in this folder, the fact sheets are all here. We have companion videos that go with the fact sheets, and there's a QR code on here that you can access that. And then just recently, the University of Maine published this tarping on small farms, and I know you guys have done a little bit of tarping up in the field. And it's got real farm experiences listed on here, as well as common sense information on tarping. So it's kind of nice that we had this project and these other resources came out.
The last point that we did for the grant with Meredith is that we did some field trials, some field demonstration trial at Snyder, because you have a lot of management strategies that are based on either weed ecology or cultivation, tarping, but you also have access to organic herbicide. All the herbicides are not just conventional herbicide. You have herbicides that are labeled for use on organic system. So we did some work on that. What did we publish on that again? I mean, I think on the fact sheet we have some information on the herbicide that we're working, but basically the lesson we learned is that most of these herbicides are just contact herbicides. So they will just be working on weeds that already emerged, and they will be working on very small weeds. If the weeds are getting bigger than 1 or 2 inches tall, do not expect to get good results with this organic herbicide. But that's another tool that you may want to use if you're a small organic farmer. Yes, you want to have a large portfolio of weed management strategies available for you.
Well, and I think in a nutshell, what we found was the 20% vinegar
Yes.
on very small broadleaf weeds had some effect.
Yes.
But repeated applications every time there's a new flush of those weeds coming up would be important. So, and it stinks. It smells like vinegar.
It smells like vinegar. On the thing too, which is important, and I hope we can go quickly to the field, but the thing which is really important with this herbicide is that the first step when you have an integrated weed management program is know what you're dealing with. You're not supposed to be...
Kathy Griffith.
Sorry, excuse me, guys. You're not supposed to be botanists, but at least you need to get some level of plant identification. So we'll give you some clue on what you need to know different type of grasses, different type of broadleaf species. I have to pick in my car. I have the Weeds of the Northeast ID book guide, and it's really a great book for your identification. So you can look at this kind of resource, but we may want to go inside that.
Yeah. So in terms of what's next, if you guys could grab a clipboard and grab, these are hand lenses. So everything that's here you can take home with you. But we want to use the hand lenses out there and take a closer look. On the clipboard, there's a one-page survey. If you could please fill that out and leave that behind. We really need to get back to the funding agency about the impacts of the project, and is there anything that we talk about today that might change your mind in how you're handling weeds in the future? So that would be great. So if you wanted to if you don't feel like you need a clipboard and a piece of paper, you can leave that behind too. Just make sure you do the survey when you come back, but just grab the hand lens.
I would take the lens to go outside because
Yes.
we'll be looking at small details on the plant, some stuff that I would like you to memorize. Or sometimes you need the lens to really.
And then all of our resources are on this USB, which I think it's a bigger storage. If you need a USB with lots of storage, grab one of those.
So if everyone wants to grab a clipboard
Yeah.
and
It's a twinning weed, and actually that's something that you can find at any seed store. You can get seed of this plant because it's making these beautiful flowers, but it's a good illustration of, in some situations, we have plants that are planted because of aesthetic value, and that can quickly become a problem. So that's one of them. Because you can look at the bed over there. I mean, Everything over there that I see is tall morning glory. So that's the name of this weed. It's tall morning glory. And you can see that it's starting to cover bed. So as a general rule, pay attention to these kind of things. If you plant, if you decide, to establish plantation or for attracting insect beneficial, make sure you have a solid knowledge of what you're planting, because you don't want them to be a problem later, because it will be more difficult to eliminate later than when you're seeding it. The other stuff with this one is that the morning glories are really well known for they are producing relatively big seed. And big seed means that the plant, the seed can survive in the soil for a long period of time. What is amazing with the morning glory is that when I do field research, when we are tilling the ground, within 2 days of tilling the ground, the first plant that will emerge is most of the time the morning glory. Not specifically the tall morning glory, most of the time it's ivy leaf morning glory, but it's reacting immediately to tilling. So when we are discussing tilling, cultivation as a tool for managing weed, it's also a good tool for stimulating the germination of weeds. So my point is that you may want to use tilling not just to control the weeds that are already present, but you may want to do some multiple tillings just to stimulate the germination of the weed and try to reduce the seed bank. We'll be discussing seed bank today. If you're taking a volume of soil, you have a number of weed seed in the soil. They are all over the place. But if you can really stimulate the germination, the more you can stimulate ahead of planting, the less weed you will have to deal with later. So that's an idea. Just taking morning glory as a good example of a weed that can react extremely quickly to cultivation.
Well, and a weed that's going to really impact your yield.
Oh,
right?
yes.
How much you're harvesting
Yes.
because of their ability to grow up and over.
Yes, especially this kind of weed. If you want to do field corn, if you want to do sweet corn, morning glories are the #1 issue in this one. Why? Because it's a trailing plant. I'm sure that this one liked to grow here because it was pretty trying to grow along this pole. But when you have tall crops like corn, sweet corn, morning glory really likes it because it's provide a support for the vine to start twisting. On the vine, basically, they will intercept the light. By intercepting the light, the plant will produce less biomass, will accumulate less nutrients, and ultimately you will have a lower production. So that's one of the ways why weeds are a problem. They're competing directly with the crop. They're competing for water, they're competing for nutrients, and they're competing for light as well. So that's why, yes, people tend to think in so many crops, people tend to think of insect or disease as the #1 weed problem. In my opinion, the biggest problem are the weeds. Because with the weed, you don't see the damage. You just don't have any yield. It's something, it's invisible because, yes, you have, the weeds are there, they're competing with the crops, they're reducing the yield, but you don't see insect damage, you don't see disease on the production like you will see with fungi or insect. With the weeds, the effect is really on reduction of plant capacity to yield, and that's something that people sometimes tend to overlook, I think.
Well, I think too, when thinking about crop budgets, and when we're not, it doesn't matter if you're using herbicides or not.
Yeah.
Right? The value of the labor to deal with the weeds. If there isn't not just a short-term plan, but a long-term plan, because that's the thing that's consistent in all the fact sheets that we did. It's really a multi-year plan to deal with weeds. Whereas I think most people, it's in front of my face, so I'm going to deal with it now, or it's going to bother me now. And then all of that time, it costs money, and that's costing your business more money. So.
And even, no matter what herbicide you have, we always have to go out on the farm and at our research areas and go out and weed some by hand. It doesn't matter, because one week the weeds are this big, and then they catch up with you and they just go crazy. And they're always competing with nutrients and light and everything else. And we just cleaned out a bunch of morning glory from our corn maze. So we were in there for hours and hours. We had to pull that down and cut it at the base. It was all through there along with cockleburr. We had a ton of cockleburr and a ton of this.
If you leave the root in, it'll come back, won't it?
It'll come right back, yes.
So
This is pretty tenacious.
So it did. This one is an annual weed. So with the first frost, this one will die. on the the roots. There is no rhizome on this one. The root will die, and it will not come back next year. But Bill says something very interesting regarding herbicide. You can use herbicide, but if we're discussing herbicide, herbicides are really active on some plants. They are not working on all the plants. Even glyphosate, I will take the most known herbicide. Even glyphosate, I can give you a few weeds that glyphosate will not kill. And in addition, herbicide, especially post-emergence herbicides, the ones that you apply when the weed have emerged, need to be applied at a specific stage. And most of the time I hear growers telling me, well, your herbicide is not working, except that you applied it on a plant that was already maybe 10, 15, 20 inches tall. So there is limits with herbicide, which means that you really need to do everything ahead of time for minimizing the use of herbicide. Think of herbicide, if you plan to use herbicide as a conventional organic herbicide, that's your ultimate weapon. Everything that you need to do, you can do ahead of time for limiting weed development, weed emergence. Capitalize on that, because yes, herbicide will not kill everything. So I wanted to start with this one because that's a good example of something which is aesthetic, but that can be really a problem later. Basically, you try to occupy as much space as possible so you limit weed infestation. The space that is occupied by the cover crop, which is a beneficial crop, will not be space that can be occupied by a weed. Okay, that's basically the principle of cover crop. But there is some caveats with cover crop, and we want to discuss one of them right here, just to give you a few examples. So right here we have a nice cover crop of buckwheat. Even if it has been a dry year this year, we still got good buckwheat emergence. And you can really see where I'm standing right here in this area. You can see a lot of buckwheat, and if you dig a little bit deeper, you don't see so many weeds emerging right here. So really the buckwheat is here to occupy the space, and by occupying the space, it's really limit weed emergence, weed growth. One of the problems with buckwheat is that it's good for this year, but you will be planting something next year right here. And you don't want to have to deal with buckwheat as a weed next year. And one of the issues right here is that if you start looking at this buckwheat, it should probably have been mowed or terminated a little bit earlier, because right here, what I have right here in my hand are buckwheat seed. On this buckwheat seed, they will just drop to the ground. We'll get water over the weekend. I'm sure that some of the seed will get back to the ground. And this stuff may be germinating next year. So that's just something to think about if you're planning to use cover crop. Know your cover crop, know what kind of cover crop you're seeding, know what is the best time to terminate the cover crop so it's not getting to seed. Because sometimes the cover crop are really great tool for really competing with the weed, but at the same time, if you don't pay attention, there may be a problem the following year.
They become your weed issue.
Yes, they can be your weed issue. So, Bill, what are you planning to do on this one? It may not be your project, but
They're going to work it in, but I don't know who's working on this.
So I believe this is part of Chelsea's bee research. They use this as a food bank for the bees, and I believe they're going to renew it in buckwheat.
So that's okay.
In buckwheat, so that's why they may want to let it go to seed.
Yeah.
But buckwheat's a great cover crop because it melts down. You can see by the structure, it melts down nicely. There's not a lot of residue to deal with. In the spring, this will be a pretty clean area.
And it's a great cover crop for pollinators as well. You have cover crops that are providing nitrogen in the leguminous. You have a bunch of grassy cover crop like ryegrass or oat. I really like this one because the grassy cover crop are really good for competing with the weed. Buckwheat, the value of buckwheat is also in attracting pollinators. So it makes sense on this one that it can go to seed if they plan to have buckwheat against planter next year. But we have growers, specialty crop growers that are growing buckwheat, and probably they will not let that go to seed because they probably want to plant something the next year.
Unless they're totally burnt out by the season and
Yes.
say to hell with it and take them away.
Well,
Which a lot of people are feeling that way right about now.
since we are discussing cover crop, I'm just thinking to that, but we did some work in the past at Snyder with Dr. Joe Ekman with Rutgers, and we are looking at Joe was interested at cover crop mostly for soil fertility management. And he was looking at two different cover crops. One was sun hemp, which is a leguminous crop, which is giving you nitrogen basically. and the other one was Sudan grass. Sorry. And we are looking at that, and he told me, well, it's interesting because it seems that the cover crop, you're growing 1 year of cover crop and you're planting, let's say, cabbage the next year, you don't have the same kind of weed growing the next year. And actually what we observed was that with Sudan grass, which is a sorghum variety if you want, you have less weed. For some species you had less weed the next year. And what's going on with sorghum Sudan grass is that the sorghum is exuding a chemical through the roots. And it's a natural herbicide. It's called sorgoleone. It has natural herbicide activity. So you can have plants like sorghum, for example, or rye, that will produce this, we are calling that the allelopathical chemical, basically. So they have allelopathic properties. And you can try to use that at your advantage for trying to get some, I would not say weed control, but mostly weed suppression. You will still get weed emerging to this cover crop, but you may get less population. So that's something that over time may be easier to deal with than just getting a big population. So I think I didn't check if they were discussing that in the book, but I hope they do it, because allelopathy is another way, to take advantage of cover crop, not just because they are occupying the space, but also because they can produce some natural herbicide, if you want, that can really compete with the weed. So that's something to think about as well.
Terry, how long is the sorgoleone available?
So that's a good question. I mean, most of the time, thanks because I did my PhD on sorghums. But sorgoleone is one of the few natural compounds that will stick to the ground. It's hydrophilic. It's hydrophobic, sorry. So it doesn't like water. So it will not get dissolved really quickly in the water, and it can stick to the ground for a longer period of time. Actually, what you observed at Snyder, I think it was really allelopathical activity, was the following year. So 9 months, 6 months after terminating the sorghum, when we are starting to plant the cabbage, yes, definitely, the plot where we had sorghum had way less weed species, especially pigweed, especially Galinsoga. We had less density in this plot compared to plot where we had sun hemp. So definitely some of this product can carry over for 6-9 months, probably not very long, but at least 6-9 months, maybe a year, you will still get some effect. But if you're rotating to a different crop the next year after cabbage, for example, do not expect to get this activity over time, because it's, these herbicides are.
So are you best following it with minimum till then after you have the sorgoleone in there?
So that's yes. We did some cultivation, because those are things to it, that you want to get some of these residues buried into the ground. Otherwise, they will just stick at the surface, which sometimes may be advantageous too, because if you have residues of cover crop at the surface, basically you're creating a barrier at the surface of the soil, and things will not emerge. But really, we wanted, because we are planting cabbage, we wanted to work the ground. It was minimum cultivation. We just I think we disc once to get some, breaking down the big parts of sorghum, getting it a little bit deeper in the soil, but we didn't do a strong tillage on this one. It was minimal cultivation, but still some level of cultivation.
Now, if you had sorghum in one part of your farm, and you actually wanted to, where is the compound that you're talking about? Is that concentrated in the root system?
In the roots. It's produced by the roots.
Oh, so it wouldn't help you to use surface sorghum as a weed control for other areas, except for blocking the light.
Yes, you can use it both ways. Actually, we have a project that will start next year where we are looking at sorghum, and you can mow it frequently. It will keep growing. Sudan grass will keep growing. So you can use it as a way of occupying the space, but at the same time, as long as the plant is alive, it will get killed by the first frost with sorghum. But as long as the plant is alive, it will keep synthesizing, it will keep producing this sorgoleone compound. So, getting the Sudan grass seeded relatively early in the season will maximize the production of sorgoleone, because you want to keep it, the longer the plant is growing, the more sorgoleone supposedly you will be accumulating in the soil.
Cool.
And sorghum Sudan is one of the cover crops that we recommend a lot in the fact sheets, specifically for the weeds that we don't want to let to go to flower and produce seed, because it is something that you can mow and manage, and therefore any weeds that are growing up in there that could be producing seed, you're also mowing that. So, yeah.
Something worth noticing here is that you have decent weed control. Okay, if it was bare ground, I would expect to see a lot more weeds, but some of the big weeds that you see right here is called Jimson weed. And Jimson weed is notorious. I mean, first it's toxic. If you're looking at the seed, and it's a little bit of seed, biology, it's really a big seed. On big seed means there is big nutrients. On it can, if you have big seed, the seed can really feed the seedlings and keep it pushing through the cover crop. So that's maybe one of the reasons why in this kind of cover crop you will get Jimson weeds, because you have this big seed and they can really help the seedling growing through the cover crop and overcoming the cover crop.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, Bill is doing it. I don't touch his crop. Sorry, not on the camera.
Too late.
No, it's just. I mean, I can. I mean, there is no problem, Bill. But it's
the seed that's
the seed is toxic. Well, the entire plant is toxic. Actually, the entire plant is toxic.
I pull it up all the
Just,
time. But
just.
maybe that's why I'm the way I am.
Right, that's your excuse. Go with it.
Okay.
Jeez, he's immunized. But no, I mean the thing with this one, yes. I mean, I can touch it. There's absolutely no problem. As long as you're washing your arm, don't put your arm to the mouth. That's the basic. But I had one summer helper 1 year working my research program on it. I mean, we never managed to get him touching this plant. He was staying at least 6 feet away from every
Really?
plant.
He had that kind of
he
reaction?
was.
We have it on the farm everywhere. We just pull it out. But
I
anyway,
like it.
it's
a
not a good
beautiful
idea to
flower.
pull it out.
Beautiful, yeah.
It's a beautiful flower.
Well, Datura, they grow it over at Rutgers Gardens.
Yep.
It's a different version of it. but-
Yeah, with the white flower.
Yeah, actually that's one for which I'm quite sure there is some ornamental Jimson weed
Yes.
because of the flower, the beauty of the flower.
You want to go head over to the old garlic bread?
Yep.
I have
Not
a
garlic
question.
bread. Garlic
How
bread.
does the
I'm hungry. It's dinner time.
I could use some garlic bread.
what's a weed seed and what's a crop seed? So it's
Se-
direct seeding in that
Yeah,
space.
selectivity. It's interesting. Is that I think in our study, what we did is that we transplanted the broccoli and the cabbage.
Okay.
So when you have something which is already established, you may have the compound in the soil, the transplant will survive. Actually, what is interesting is that with some, it was working well on some weed species. It was really inhibiting the development of the germination of the seed. It was not working at all on some other weed species. So that you have some selectivity, meaning that we don't know because, no one can test for every kind of weed to see if this compound will be working on any kind of weed that you may have on the farm.
Right.
But if you were doing something like that, it may be worth working with transplantation, working with a crop that you can transplant on. It's really a good point because we know that when you're transplanting, you already have a plant with an established root system, and the plant will be minimally affected by the compounds, by the natural herbicide.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, if you are seeding, especially small-seeded weed were the ones that were really affected. In this kind of situation, if you are seeding, let's say, beans, it's a relatively big seed. I would expect beans to have no problem with this kind of
There's like
situation.
lettuce.
But now, if you're looking at lettuce, that would be a different situation. But I mean, again, lettuce. I mean, most of the people I know are transplanting lettuce. They are not seeding directly the lettuce.
Unless it's like a leafy green mix.
Yeah,
right?
or leafy
Like
green
the
mix or
leaf,
something like
yeah.
that. Yeah. But for example, basil. I mean, we have been working on basil, doing some experimentation on basil. We are seeding basil, and it's a relatively small seed.
Okay, thank you.
So has anyone any idea what kind of weeds we have right here? What you have in your hand? Wheatgrass? No. Nope.
No idea.
No
grass.
idea? It's a grass. I mean, good point. It's a grass. 5 points.
What
I-
animal's tail
Okay,
does it
wait.
Look at the tail.
A squirrel.
Nope.
That'd be a good one too.
Thanks, Bill.
Actually, it's called foxtail.
Ah.
And it's you will see it. I mean, at different places on the farm. But I mean, my point on looking at foxtail is really to give you some idea about grass identification, because it's probably one of the most difficult topics, is that, you know, knowing what you need to look to for identifying grasses. Actually on the guide, on Meredith as a guide, that's something, I mean, we don't have a free copy of this one, but if you're interested really at looking at weed identification, this guide is really the best one available these days. Why is it important to know what kind of weeds you're dealing with? Mostly because different management strategies will work differently on different weed species. What I mean by that is that if all herbicide, if you're using herbicide for example, all herbicides are not working on the same way on different species. If you're using cultivation, cultivation may be working on some species for killing them, but may not be working on some others. Even in worst case situation, cultivation may increase a problem, not just, you know, decrease the problem. So for example, for grasses, and it's a way for you to really try to practice how to use your lens. Identifying grasses, it's starting to be easy when you're looking, when they're producing the seed head, so that's where the seed, it's easy to identify, but maybe it's too late. You know, when you're at this stage, you already know that on this one, pretty much all the seed have already started dropping to the ground, are replenishing the seed bank, so they will be available for next year. On depending on the species, the seed bank can last for 5, 10, 20, I mean some species, they manage to see that the seed were still able to germinate 50 years after being buried in the soil. They stay dormant for 50 years, but after 50 years, if you put it with the right condition, this seed will produce a seedlings. So when you're looking at grasses, really the basic stuff is the way you separate many grasses is by looking right here where the leaf is joining the stem. Okay? And if you're looking at it, you will see, if you separate it nicely from the stem, and if you're looking with your lens, and look at the way I'm holding my lens like that, I'm putting it really close to my eye, on the right here, you're adjusting, you will see a small ligule, so a kind of membrane which is just at the base of the leaf, which is on the leaf. Put it really close to your, but really close, like that. Look at the distance right here. It's really extremely close to the plant. But you will see right here, at the base of the leaf, you will see this small, what we are calling the ligule. So that's the ligule of the grasses.
And they can be really different from
And they can be really different. And
sometimes they're like hugging the stem, sometimes they're non-existent. Yeah.
I mean, here's another grass species, it's called crabgrass. And if you're looking at crabgrass, if I do the same thing with crabgrass, right here, the ligule will be completely different on this one. On this one, it will be like a paper membrane, okay? Something very papery. On this one, it's just a fringe of earth on this one. And that's one of the tricks, you know, when you're looking at the guide, if at some point you plan to have the guide, that's the kind of information that you need to understand for identifying grasses, because something that may be working for controlling the foxtail may not be working for controlling the crabgrass. So that's some of the detail. Other things that you may want to look is, foxtail, it's really well known. There's three main species of foxtail that you can find in the field. One is a yellow foxtail, actually, that's this one. One is a giant foxtail, I think we saw it over there. On the green foxtail that I've not seen very often. But this one, I would say it's yellow foxtail, mostly because if I'm looking at some of the, if I don't see it on this one, it's, I need to look at the older leaves. But yes, if you have a big stem like I have right here, don't always look at the younger leaf, but look at the leaf at the base of the stem. So look at leaves right here, or yes, this one. You should be able to see some really big hairs. Even with the naked eye, you should see it. Okay, do you see them? Okay, that's the indication. You know, if you are just looking at the seed head, you will be, well, it's a foxtail. How do you separate the different foxtail? Well, the presence of the big hairs, really at the base of the leaf, is a giveaway to tell you it's yellow foxtail. Okay.
And what's nice about this book is it tells you exactly what you're. See, here's a look. This is reed canary grass, but you can see it's got a hand drawing of what the ligule will look like, and it tells you over here if they're hairs, if they're short, if they're long, if they're on the upper side or the lower side, and so it's really nice to have all that in one place.
On the thing that is, it's even more crucial when you are organic growers. If you do not plan to rely on synthetic herbicide, I would say it's even more crucial to rely on good weed identification. Because herbicide, okay, I mean, even if I say that they don't work on everything, we have a family of herbicides which are called the graminicides. They are working pretty much on every kind of grasses. But if you don't have that, I mean, depending on what kind of strategy you plan to use, you really want to know what you're dealing with, because that will give you indication if it's working or not. And if you're using the big book will have this kind of indication. Okay, the big book is classified by weed species. So that's, when you're looking at the book, if you want to know what is working on a specific weed, the first step is really to identify the weed. So that's why, I mean, I wanted you to practice a little bit, just a few stuff, just to demonstrate how it works. But that's some of the things that you need to do if you want to look at identifying some of the weeds.
The hand lines is good for insect identification, right? All the things that you just.
Well,
that
my
are just
daughter
too
likes to
small
play
out
with
there.
that all the time.
Or
So
right?
thank you for her.
Fruiting bodies on late blight and all
Insects
kinds
and
of stuff.
diseases,
Yeah.
all kinds of good things.
Yeah. All right,
How
now
many
you want to
seeds
talk
will
about.
each one of those foxtails produce, yellow foxtail?
So a seed head like this one, probably in the 100, 200 seed.
Okay.
But if you're looking at foxtails, they can tiller. Okay, they can produce many seed head per plant. So overall, I mean, one big plant can produce 500, 100, 1,000 seeds. Now with some other weed species, we know that we have some weed species that can produce up to 1 million seeds per plant. And it's not usually a bad weed. We start to get it in New Jersey, Palmer amaranth. But this one, yes, I mean, they managed to show that on average, 500,000 up to 1 million seeds per plant.
And
So
then the
that's-
factor of how long do those seeds live in the soil?
So the big thing to keep in mind too is that the smaller the seed, the less viable they will stay in the ground, because they can be, they can be consumed by they can be degraded by pathogens, they can be consumed by mammals, by whatever biological life we have in the soil. So the bigger the seed, the longer they will probably survive in the ground. In the fact sheet, I think we mentioned it, but for grasses, for example, the grasses, the survival rate of the seed in the ground is relatively low. So if you do 2-3 years of good weed control, of good weed management, you can seriously reduce your grassy seed bank in the ground. Because if you don't renew the seed bank, clearly you will not get seed emergence in the future. There is something very important that I wanted to mention with regard to with the seed bank. Something you have to people are telling me, well, if we are burying the seed deep in the soil, if we do a deep tillage, we should be using that for managing the seed, because they will not germinate. If they are deep in the soil, they will not germinate. Actually, it's true, but it's a one shot. It's just a single shot solution. Because the deeper you're burying the seed, the more you will increase the survival, the viability of the seed in the ground. Because they are better protected from predation, they are better protected from disease, they are better protected from light degradation. So if you do that, seeing that you don't want to come back next year with the same solution by inverting the soil, bringing back some deep soil at the surface. Why? Because what you put deeper in the soil the previous year will get back to the surface and will germinate for sure. So keep that's I would say common sense, but we don't think always like that. And it's really something to keep in mind, is that if you bury the seed deeper in the soil, you will increase the survival, the viability of the seed over time. So maybe that's a solution that you want to use every 5 years, not something that you want to use every year.
So Terry, in this situation, right, we have a raised bed because this was garlic.
Yep.
We have a lot of seed production happening with the grasses.
Yeah.
So to me, I'm thinking like a weed whacker could, you know, a few weeks ago, or how long ago before the seed, right before
Sorry,
that
Brandon.
seed matures?
I'm not here to pinpoint, you know, to point, I mean, but a kind of good weed management, like you said, is the basic rule is do not let the weed go to seed. So in this case, it's already too late. You know, I mean, you can mow it at this point, the seed are already there. That's something that should probably have been mowed a month ago before they start maturing, before the seeds start ripening. So keep in mind that in terms of weed management, you may have weeds, but you want to keep them relatively low, and you want to make sure you're limiting seed production. Because there is a say, which is if you have 1 year of seed production on the weed, you will get 10 years at least of weed management to deal with. Bill, is it true?
Yes, it is, absolutely. Brendan, just to his defense, he did lead this, so you have
For
a
us, we had to have something to talk about.
That's
No, we
great.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Brandon.
Self-sacrificed for the next 10 years, right?
But
Thanks.
yeah, that's true that on this one, that will be a system where clearly, I mean, you will be dealing with a lot of crabgrass, a lot of foxtail on this field for the future. But one of the solutions may be to start using tarping, you know, either plastic or eventually, I mean, that's something that we didn't do in New Jersey, but you have some clear plastic, that's what they're using mostly in California, where you can increase, I mean, you're putting a clear plastic, it will accumulate heat, and it's accumulating sufficient heat for sterilizing, for killing the weed seed in the ground. So that may be a solution, especially, I mean, it may not be working for the big weed seed, but for smaller seed like what we have on crabgrass or foxtail, that should be something to working. A year like this year, I would have loved to do it because it was so dry, we didn't get rain, we were probably accumulating a lot of energy that we could have been using for sterilizing the ground, for killing the weed
So that would
seed
be
in
like
the ground.
soil solarization.
It's
then.
soil solarization, yes.
Okay.
Except if there is any other question, but the other one that I want to discuss is this one, because it's part of the fact sheet, Meredith.
It is part
Yes.
of the fact sheet, our Canada thistle.
Yes, it's super spiky.
Wait, I feel like, and you've probably seen this in Middlesex also, I just feel like the farmers are complaining about thistle maybe over the past 5 years more than they have, right? And it's just, I think it's just the changing environment is more conducive to a lot of weeds, let alone Canada thistle.
So one of the big problems with Canada thistle is a perennial weed. And if I was taking a shovel and digging deep in the soil, it has an amazing network of roots
It's all
really
connected
deep in the soil.
underneath.
Everything right here, you see it right here, connecting right here, it's probably one single plant with shoots emerging from the same root system. The big problem with that is that, I mean, you will have a hard time killing it. The way you can kill it, the way you can manage it without having to rely on herbicide, it's really mowing. You need to mow this plant. As soon as it starts producing new shoots, you need to mow it. Why? Because by doing that, you will be forcing the plant to use what is accumulated in the rhizome, in the soil. You will force the plant to produce new shoots. As soon as you're moving the new shoots, as soon as you're mowing the new shoots, the plant cannot accumulate nutrients and send them back to the roots. So by doing the frequent mowing, you're really you're forcing the plant to use nutrients that are stored underground. And if you do that on a frequent basis, I would say every 7-10 days in average, when the thistle is growing, I would say after 2-3 years, you should start to see your Canada thistle population starting to decrease. But it's really a problematic weed to deal with. It's reproducing by the rhizome, so all these plants are probably coming from the same rhizome. But you can see on some of these, I mean, they're starting to produce flowers. I mean, it's small bud right here, but there is a flower that will be coming from this bud. On this one are producing extremely small seed that can be dispersed by the wind. this weed is also a problem because it has this dual mode of reproduction. It has asexual reproduction, meaning that you don't need to get pollination, so that's when you have the rhizome, but it has also sexual reproduction with flowers, and it make it very, very problematic.
Right, and then if the roots get fragmented.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Meredith,
So
for that.
cultivation is not appealing.
So, we try to think that, cultivation is a good way for killing the weeds. Well, the problem with this one is that the rhizome, each individual piece of rhizome can generate a new plant. So if you start using cultivation, that's why weed identification is so important. If you start using cultivation on Canada thistle, instead of reducing the problem, you will drag a piece of rhizome over the field, and instead of killing the plant, you will just increase the magnitude of the problem because it will spread around the field. So that's one of the big issues with Canada thistle. Again, weed identification is key. There is other species of thistle that are not producing rhizome. This one, bull thistle for example, is a single plant, very spiky. Single plant, yes, you can eventually kill it with cultivation. Canada thistle, not ready. This one, mowing will be a better option because you really need to force the plant to use nutrients that are stored underground.
And none of the OMRI approved organic herbicides touched the thistle.
Yes.
It thrived that whole season, no matter what. Even the conventional
So
Yes.
they love the
herbicide.
vinegar? They just
Yeah,
love
now,
vinegar?
I mean, there might have been some singeing on it, and it was the same thing with
I mean,
purslane.
they
Like
just
there was
said,
singeing,
add
but
some
they
olive oil?
they gave me the finger.
Yeah, I mean, maybe as a surfactant, but yeah, you will. With the organic herbicide we tested, we got cosmetic damage on the plant. But clearly, if you have so many shoots in the ground, if you have so many rhizomes in the ground, the plant will just regenerate itself very
The
quickly.
young lamb's quarters, hairy galansoga, pigweed, the very tiny seedlings that were impacted by the vinegar.
Stinger on that?
On that, yes, because it's an Asteraceae. Yeah. Something that Meredith mentioned is organic herbicide. Organic herbicide are contact herbicide. They are just killing the tissues of the plant that the plant is touching. They are not synthetic herbicide, glyphosate for example, they are systemic herbicide. You put the herbicide right here, it will move with the sap, it will move to the rhizome, and that's the way you can effectively kill the plant. Organic herbicide, you just put the herbicide right here, it will just kill the plant tissue where it's touching the plant. Meaning that organic herbicide, if you want them to be effective, you really need to use small seedlings. If the plant is already too big, you will never get enough herbicide to really cover the plant and kill it completely. The other thing to mention too is that organic herbicides are working relatively good on broadleaf dicots, the plants that are making two cotyledons, such as, I need to find one. I will show you some dicots later. Thistle is a dicot, but it's a perennial dicot, so it's clearly a little bit different. But on dicots, on dicotyledons, it's working well. On grasses, not so much. Why? Because the grasses, the growing point of the grasses is deeply in the plant. If you're looking at some of the crabgrass right here,
Turculary meristem.
you see that? You see you have this stem right here, but you have a new one coming really from the base of the plant. And if you're putting some of these contact herbicides, they will just kill the top of the plant, but you will never get enough herbicide to kill what is the growing point at the base of the plant. So the organic herbicides are not really working well on grasses. On broadleaf species, again, I should not use Canada thistle, but the growing point is where? Right at the top, right here. On many broadleaf species, the growing point is at the top of the plant. It's not buried deeper in the soil. So that's why these organic herbicides, contact herbicides, are more effective on broadleaf, on dicots, because the growing point is not protected.
Why don't we move into?
Yes. On the thing is that it has been dry, so weed need water to germinate. So the point is really that, if you're cultivating, be careful, because each time that you will get water, you can expect, especially if you have water on nice temperature, you can expect to get a flush of weed emergence. Again, timing is critical with weed control. The smaller the seedlings, if you want to cultivate, if you want to mow, the smaller the seedling, the more efficient your weed control will be. So keep in mind that you also need to check the weather condition to monitor your weed population. Do not expect that because you did something at one time at the beginning of the season, it will be sufficient for the rest of the season. No, weed can emerge. I mean, species have different favorite time during the season, but you have weed species that can keep emerging during the entire season. Okay, from mid-May to September. I mean, yes, I mean, we still have lamb's quarter. I mean, I still have lamb's quarter emergence right now. It died up a little bit during the summer because it was really warm. It was maximal in spring. Now that it's getting cooler, we have a second flush of a lamb's quarter emergence. So knowing weed biology, and again, I mean, the book is really well done for that. The book on our fact sheet as well. I'm not promoting just the book, but we did a pretty damn good work with the fact sheets. Learn how to identify this weed and look at some element of weed biology, because it's really, knowing that a weed is mostly emerging during spring or later in the season will probably help you to, okay, that's, I plan to have this crop seeded late I plan to get cabbage transplanted in early August or something like that. You will have an idea of what weeds you will have to deal with. So Brandon, when we came here with Brandon a little bit earlier, I mean, he was showing me two different techniques that you can use for suppressing the weed. I don't say controlling, because controlling, you are expecting to get 90% control. So, I mean, 90% of the weed will disappear. Suppression, I mean, the weed can still be there. One is really the mulch. I heard that Bill didn't like this one because it was too coarse. There was pieces of wood in this mulch. But really using mulch as a barrier for limiting the emergence of weeds is a really good idea. It's working on most of the annual weed species, the ones that are forming seeds. Now, I mean, with some of them, with perennial weed species, if we had thistle right here, thistle would not care about putting mulch. Because thistle, I mean, you have all these rhizome below ground, I mean, you have all these nutrients that can help pushing the plant that can help the plant pushing new shoots at the surface. Usually, yes, I mean, a good mulch, I mean, you will have to put 2-3 inches of mulch layer to really get good weed control. There is some drawbacks with the mulch that mainly if you put fertilizer, the fertilizer can be tied up to the mulch, so you need to manage your crop by maybe increasing the nitrogen, because some of the nitrogen will be used by bacteria, by microorganisms to degrade the mulch. It's an organic mulch. Microorganisms will like to feed on that, and the way they are feeding is that they need to use carbon. That's a perfect source of carbon, but it's a really poor source of nitrogen. So when you're bringing nitrogen for the crop, actually the first thing that will be using nitrogen are the microorganisms that are feeding on the mulch. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind again is that if you're dealing with perennial weeds, things like Canada thistle, things like nutsedge, yes, we have a fact sheet on nutsedge. This one, they really don't care about the mulch, because they have enough juice, if you want, in the rhizome, in the tubers, for pushing through the mulch. So that's one of the problems. Bill, do you want to make any comment on this mulch?
Well, I just want to say that when you use mulch, we've had good luck with weed control with mulch, depending on what crop we're doing. Typically, after we plant, you can put mulch down ahead of time, and then you can come in and put mulch around the plants. This particular mulch we were expecting it to be broken down a little bit more. So in that case, you don't want the mulch, like Terry was saying, to actually be in a non-decomposed state, because when you start to mix it in with the root system, the bacteria are going to pull the nitrogen away. So then you have to add extra nitrogen for the plant to do well. But with some of the mulches, though, they have had luck. Some of my growers actually will go out in fields that they're not going to necessarily plant right away, and they'll use some stuff that's not as decomposed just to start building up carbon and organic matter, but you're not going to get right back out on that field again. The problem is you're going to have to wait a while for that to break down. The larger the components that you can still recognize, the longer it's going to take to compost and break down into usable organic matter. But some of the larger stuff you can use around plants once you have them planted, as long as the roots underneath of that, it's not competing for the nitrogen necessarily. But you still have to watch it. If your plants start to yellow up a little bit, you have to add a little bit more nitrogen. So, but it does work.
Terry, I had one question about nut sedge specifically. So I've seen recently there's some new varieties of like a slightly transparent green plastic mulch that alleges nut sedge management, and that it basically, because sunlight gets through to the nut sedge, it softens the growing point and it doesn't puncture in the same way. Have you seen that, and what are your thoughts of the truth of those claims?
So that's the next. I mean, that's the next mulch type, which is plastic mulch, which you had right here. On nut sedge is really well known, as you said, for being able. I mean, if you're looking at the nut sedge leaves, it's really it's a hardy leaf. It's spunky, and it can pierce through the plastic. Now, I mean, yes, I mean there is some newer type of plastic that may be thicker, that can prevent nut sedge to really pierce through the plastic. My problem with the plastic is whatever you do, you may have excellent weed control, but when you have plastic, you need to punch a hole somewhere to transplant the crop. Guess where the weeds will be growing? They will be growing straight from the, from this hole. And the problem is that with plastic, you're putting fertilization, you're putting irrigation, you're putting a drip tape under the plastic, and actually in the hole where you're planting you're transplanting your crops, that's exactly, I mean, the weeds will just grow very well because you have water, because you have nutrients, and there is very low competition. So that's it's working, but that doesn't mean that you have a plastic that you will not get any weed management to do. You will still have to monitor your weed population, because where you're punching your hole for transplanting your crop, I can guarantee you that will be the place where the weeds will be growing, definitely.
What we've also found, and I've done work with this, but right after you work the ground, if you can cover the ground quickly, except for where you're going to put plants, then you prevent light from getting to the seed, from germinating.
Yeah.
And that's really something that if we've done that on some of our areas where we're doing research or we're growing stuff on our farm, we find we can get pretty good weed control, but we got to come in right after we work the soil.
Yes.
And prevent that sunlight from hitting us. So this kind of mulch would work great for something like that, because even though it's not broken down completely, it's just preventing the weeds from getting there. And then when you come in and plant by hand, if you have a trowel, you just move it aside, plant, and then pile the mulch right up next to it again. Then you'll at least you're allowing sunlight, but you're not allowing room for that weed to grow or to germinate. And we have the same thing when we're growing strawberries, because we do a lot of strawberry trials, and we try to let the strawberry trials go for a second year, even though it's high density strawberries. We'll plant them and we get our best crop that next season, but most of our farmers are letting that go a second season to get the full use out of their plastic, and then after the second
It's a
year,
lot of labor.
it's a lot of labor, and you got to go in and you got to clean out, like Terry says, around the plant, because you're going to have, that's where the weeds come in, right next to the plant, so that's the greatest competition. And then sometimes we even have to go in and divide the strawberry because the crown tissue gets too big. So that's a lot of work the second year.
But Bill had a really good point regarding you applying the mulch soon after cultivating. Remember what I told you before. When you're working the ground, when you're cultivating, when you're disking, you're stimulating the emergence of the weed. So when you're preparing the ground, you do a raised bed. If you do not put your plastic relatively soon after, actually you will be working the ground and you will be stimulating the emergence of the weed. That's why, I mean, when I have research, I mean, I was working on a cover crop this year. We're working on tomatoes and cucumber. We are putting plastic. I mean, actually, our equipment was really forming the bed, and at the same time, you're putting, the equipment has a roll of plastic on it, and you're laying down your plastic at the same time. This way, it's done in just one single operation. You don't have to come back. And it's really something which is working. Again, if you wait too long, you will create some disturbance, you will expose some of the seed to the light. As Bill said, the light is very important for stimulating weed seed germination. And yes, I mean, if you have to be, I mean, the key word to keep in mind today is that you have to be timely. You have to be timely when you want to control the weed. You don't want the weeds to start to be too big before trying to cultivate, to kill them. You don't want the weed to be starting to produce seed, because otherwise you will replenish the seed bank. Same thing, when you're working the ground, you don't want to put your plastic or any kind of mulch too late, because working the ground, it's a good strategy for stimulating weed emergence. Actually, it's something that we didn't discuss, but the stale seed bed, it's something that for, especially, not just for organic growers, it should be working for everyone. You're working the ground, you're forcing the weed to germinate, and you come back maybe a week or 10 days later with a light cultivation, really light. You want to work the first 2 inches of the soil, and you're killing the second cultivation will kill what has emerged, but will not bring back, will not stimulate the emergence of new weeds, because you're not working deep enough to stimulate the emergence of new weeds. So that's a stale seedbed technique. Again, it's something which is discussed both in the fact sheets
And
and
yeah,
in the
the
guide.
University of Maine document. And with the stale seed bed too, sometimes it's just forming your beds, letting that flush of germination happen, and like Terry said, do the cultivation. But we also see people using tarps to help stimulate and get it warmer depending on the time of year, and then coming through with the cultivation.
On when you do the second cultivation to kill the weed, look at your weather forecast. Because if you have rain within the 24-48 hours after cultivation, if some of these weeds are big enough, if you're getting rain relatively soon, I mean, they will not desiccate enough to get killed. So make sure that if you do the second cultivation, the light cultivation for killing the seedlings, check the weather forecast, make sure you have dry condition for the next week, just to make sure that, it's really killed.
I think we've all probably been there, right, where you've gone through and you've weeded grasses and left them behind, and then you come back after a rain a week or two, and then they've all re-rooted into the ground and are loving life.
And
Yeah.
actually, it's something that, again, the growth stage of the weed will be critical. The smaller the seedlings, the less capacity the seedling will have to survive if you're unrooting it. The bigger the weed, the bigger the root system, the more energy, the more nutrients are stored in the plant, and the more the weed can survive, even if the root system is exposed outside. At the next rain, you will get rain. The roots, if they're touching the ground, they will just reroot themselves very quickly.
David had a picture of, he was just at the International Hazelnut Conference.
Yep.
They had this giant machine that ran by the PTO shaft. It was a giant generator. It actually electrocuted the weeds as it was driving along.
That's a thing, yeah.
And it sent the juice all the way down into the root system of the weeds. So it had.
I want
That's
one.
satisfying, right?
I mean, I have colleagues. I mean, I have a good friend and colleague at Cornell University. She managed to get a NIFA grant to get a weed zapper.
Yeah.
And actually, I really would like. I think that the future, it's where we need
The
to start
future's
looking
electricity?
at. Yeah, well, unfortunately for some weed species, if you're dealing, I mean, Bill was mentioning the one that the problem in the field, Bill.
Mugwort?
Mugwort.
Yeah.
Mugwort, if you really want to get rid of mugwort, you need to use herbicide. I'm sorry to say that, but it's pretty much the only solution you have to get rid of mugwort. Actually, if something happens, if you're losing, herbicide are labeled. They are registered by EPA, and it's a difficult process. If you're losing the herbicide, if you don't have any herbicide left for killing the weed, what are you doing? You have nothing left, basically, for killing mugwort. On electricity, I would be interested to see if electricity is really working on mugwort. That's something.
You know what? We should write a grant for
There
that
you
because
go.
it looked like such a cool machine. We got to get one just so we can
Yes.
play around with it.
Another toy.
Just don't have any students standing next to it when they're standing in water.
Does that have an effect on the microorganisms in the soil?
That's something that we are thinking too. Is that
My guess is that
yes,
it would.
There's many factors. I mean, my colleague Lynn Sosnowski at Cornell, so she was working. I mean, actually, most of these weeders, of these weed zapper, are developed for agronomic crops. You will see big ones for soybean, for example. And she was trying one of these equipment in a beet field, and she observed that sometimes, depending on the soil moisture, she had more or less damage on the beets. I mean, she managed to get beets breaking down on basically splitting in half because of electricity. Wow. And it was depending on the soil condition as well. So there is a lot, it's not just using the equipment for controlling the weed. I mean, before doing that, there is a lot of research that needs to be done to see, okay, if we do that, are we controlling the weed? Are we damaging the crop? Are we causing damage to the biological activity of the soil as well? So there is a lot of question regarding that. But that may be a solution. When you start to get a better feeling of what are the limitations, well, you can start thinking of what may be the best condition to use this kind of equipment.
I should talk about municipal leaves here. Are you guys familiar with the fact that farms can take in municipal leaves, right? The municipalities and counties go around sucking up the leaves from people's front yards. And so farmers in New Jersey can submit a permit to their municipality to get permission to take in the leaves. They have to submit this permit because our state deems leaves as trash, so it's actually the farm taking in trash, which is really municipal leaves. And so we've had farms that have been very successful in increasing their organic matter content. One farm in particular, Chickadee Creek, who's in Mercer, she has been able to get her organic matter up by 1% a year, which is amazing. And so she has a lot of permanent raised beds, and what they'll do is they'll use the leaves in between the beds. So that's her, she's using the leaves not only for organic matter, but to really suppress the weeds that are growing in there. But we see lots of composting with the municipal leaves also. We'll see farms that take them in, and on a field like that, they'll do a 6-inch layer on top just before it rains, because that moisture helps keep things in place. And then in the spring, they'll turn them in. When it goes back to, right, looking for yellowing leaves to know if you've got enough nitrogen there.
Chop the leaves up.
That they'll break down more quickly if they're chopped up, but most of the farms, they just don't have the time to do that themselves. And then there's another farm. It started at Fernbrook Farms just outside of Bordentown, and Jeff now has Rancocas Creek Farm in Southampton. And he has, the Bordentown community collects pizza boxes in big dumpsters, and they'll do several layers of the pizza boxes in the middle of the row. And then they layer the leaves on top of that, and then the pizza boxes break down by the next season. It's really great for those perennial leaves.
What does the cheese do to the field?
Oh,
Yeah.
The mice will eat it.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes you find weird stuff in there, or weird notes scribbled on the boxes.
There's a lot of recycling centers won't take pizza boxes.
Exactly, and so it's his way of getting around that. And actually, DEP, that they had raised a red flag about that, but we were able to push them back. It's not this is a good use for the pizza boxes. It's not an issue because the inks have really changed on the boxes.
I will bounce back on what Meredith said on its, composting. You can use compost really for getting weed control, but you can also use compost for introducing weeds to your farm
And
your
herbicides.
operation. Yes, on herbicide residues as well. That's something else to discuss. But if you're using compost, if you plan to use compost, make sure that these composts are coming from areas that, from piles that have been thoroughly composted, where they respected the cycle of high temperature, on several cycles of high temperature for sterilizing whatever is in the compost, including the weed seed.
You should be able to get a certificate of analysis, so the lab tests they should be doing batch testing of the compost.
And the other problem is that herbicide, especially with grass clippings, you don't know what has been spread on some of these grasses. On some herbicide may have very long activity and may still be active, in the clippings. And you want to be careful with that, because some of these herbicides may not be detrimental to the grass, but 99% of the crop we are growing, except sweet corn, are not grasses. They are die cuts, they are carrots, they are, you know, they have two cotyledons. There's the die cuts, and this one may be extremely sensitive to some of these herbicides.
I work with a cut flower farm this year that took in manure from a friend, and they had transplanted like 5,000 plugs for their cut flower crop, and they all died. And so what we suggested that they do is they planted bean seeds in the soil that had been amended with the manures, and then planted the bean seeds in the natural soil at the farm. And sure enough, the beans did not germinate in the soil, so they were the amended soil. So that was, they know they're not going to be getting manures from that. And it's a class of herbicides that are used in the forage crops that are being used to feed these animals, and they don't break down as they go through the animal, and they come out the other end and hang around for a long time. So.
Actually, that's a good point. You can make your own test. You're getting your manure, buy it sufficient, you know, ahead of time before planting the crop. Do a small test by your own, looking at what is, you know, put it in a pot, water it, look at what is coming. Is there any weeds coming from that? Put some sensitive crops. Beans are very sensitive to many herbicides. You know, put a pot, put some bean seed, water, look at the germination, look at how the beans are looking just after, you know, 2 weeks, if they are emerging well. So you can test by yourself. You know, if you're not confident enough in the quality of what you're buying, yes, I mean, put that, you know, in a small greenhouse or in the garden. Just look at what it, you know, what is coming out of that.
The problem with testing too that we've seen in the past is that, you know, if you do what Terry and Meredith are saying, that's better because you're testing what you're going to get.
Yeah.
If they hand you a certificate, well, unfortunately, they had tested some of this stuff before and said it was fine.
It's a moment in time, right?
And so that was one isolated sample from another area, but, you know, it changes over time and the ingredients change. One of the things I liked about what Middlesex was doing for a long time is they had a really high quality leaf compost, and Joe Heckman did a long time ago did research with us, and he was looking what was in there, and they did a really nice job of getting the temperature up, making sure that it was, and we would test it all the time from contaminants, and you know, the majority of the time we found that it was the product was fine, you know, and they were doing a good job because they had a big windrow turner, so they were turning it in so that it was breaking down properly. But it's a good idea to do your own test on whatever product you're going to get a little bit ahead of time and test it and see what germinates and what doesn't. So.
And then I just add on in terms of the municipal leaves, there are farms in Ocean and Atlantic County that take in the seaweed from the beaches. The municipalities are pulling the seaweed off the beaches, and they use that, and they've been really successful with liking that too. Except they're pulling out like pails and little kitty shovels and things rather than the dog toys. And, you know, the stuff that comes in with the municipal leaves, so.
And in some cases, you get a lot of garbage, so you really have to be careful where you get your product.
Yeah.
How do they mitigate the salt on?
You know, that's it. I don't know. I don't know
That's a good
if
question.
we haven't done any. They have very cheap salt meters, handheld salt meters, and that would be interesting to look at. But if
That's
there's
where
enough rain,
certificate
it's
would be
probably
really
not
great.
an issue.
They should be testing for that.
But in a high tunnel where you're not getting that exposure to all the rain events, it's probably a bigger issue than out in a field when they've got significant. Well, if it's season like this, probably salt buildup was more of an issue.
Typically where you get enough rain, and if the soil is a lighter soil, you don't get a lot of salt buildup necessarily. But if you have a heavier soil, then you could have problems. Or if you're in a high tunnel, like Meredith is saying, we've seen that where that's problematic, where we'll get a high salt concentration and the plants just don't want to grow in that stuff. But,
Penn State has a great resource. Elsa Sanchez does a nice talking about salt levels in the soil and what to look for. And really, when the high tunnels, it's just timing, taking off the plastic to maximize the amount of rain that's going to hit the tunnel before you put the plastic
and
back
I
on.
think we've talked to you guys about it, but do not use biosolids.
No.
We did work, unfortunately I did work about 30 years ago with a couple of my colleagues, and we could never get a consistent biosolid product. And as we said in class, you have to be concerned about heavy metals, other contaminants that we're finding in there. And Cornell did a really extensive study on that. And we can post that on our website so you can take a look at it. But it's called the Cause for Caution. And they did a lot of work proving that it's just not a good idea to use biosolids, especially where you're going to grow vegetable crops, because if you have any of those residual heavy metals or other contaminants, they're in your soil for a long time. We were using it in New Jersey for a little while, but myself and about 5 colleagues got together and we kind of convinced New Jersey not to use it on their production areas. So
Well,
it's
Farm Credit East won't approve a loan on a property where human waste has been applied.
Yeah.
So that's a big barrier for a good reason.
So before I was maybe not clear on what was a monocote on a dicot. So I have a perfect example right here to show you what is a dicot. A dicotyledonous weed. So right here it's called Enbit. This plant, I recognize it already because it's the time when it germinates. It's a weed which germinates in fall and will grow later. But the 2 round leaves right here are called the cotyledon of the plant. Okay, that's what is coming straight from the seed. The first 2 leaves are really right here. They are a little bit lower. The cotyledon are really at the base, and you can see on the side right here the first 2 leaves. So that's a dicot because you have 2 cotyledons. You have these 2 cotyledons right here. The grasses only have 1 cotyledon, so that's just wanted to make that clear for you guys. But that's why it's called a dicot. So clearly, when I was talking about organic herbicides, they will be working well on this one because the growing point is really at the tip of the plant. On the grasses, the growing point is really deeper, so that's the difference. But yeah, to show you that weeds are emerging all the time. Okay, when almost October, on this stuff, it's a winter annual. It will keep emerging in October, November, maybe not December, January, but probably will keep emerging in February, March. On March, if you look at the field, at some of the field in March, you have this kind of really nice purple flower in the field. On it, this one, it's called Enbit. All right.